Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Fashion Your Passion podcast. This is a super special episode because we are talking everything mental health. You guys submitted your questions and they're going to get answered today. So stay tuned for all of them. I have Sarah Marandi-Steeves on today, who is a psychotherapist, a coach, a speaker, a writer, just everything you possibly imagine. That's what she is. And I'm super excited to have her on the show today. So Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Of course. Can you just give my listeners a little bit more about what you do, who you are, and just an inside look at the journey to getting to this point where you are today?
Absolutely. So I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have been in a private practice setting for the past 5 years. And prior to being in a private practice setting, I had worked at an agency. My specialized population that I work with is children and families and young adults. And I specialize clinically in anxiety, depression, ADHD, behavioral concerns with younger children, as well as parent training. And so in terms of the clinical work that I do, that's pretty much what my practice is all about. And right now, because of COVID, everything has transitioned to telehealth. So that has been a really cool new experience to kind of get to work with people in a different capacity. And I do coaching, as you had mentioned as well. And so my coaching is very focused specifically for other mental health professionals looking to start their own private practices. So when I had first started my practice, it was very much like I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this. And I didn't think I was going to do it as I knew at some point I would have a practice. I just didn't know that I would do it as early as I ended up doing it. And it was because I had just felt really burnt out and drained and exhausted in the clinic setting that I had been working in for many years. And I just got to the point where I was like, I need a change. I got to do something different. And so I put in my resignation and I, gave 4 weeks notice and I left my job on a Wednesday and I started my practice on a Thursday. And it was a big leap of faith. And it was definitely something that was by far one of the scariest things I've ever done, to just kind of start cold turkey and not do the slow transition. So, I learned a lot throughout that process. And what I found was I was able to start a really successful, thriving practice, and many other clinicians started to approach me about how I was able to do that, and what I did and how I got there. And what I started to learn was that there's a real need for guidance around starting a practice. I didn't have any kind of course or anything that I took. I did a lot of research, I did a lot of consults, I had my own business coach, but nothing really specific to starting a practice. And so what I did was I had initially designed a 8-week course for clinicians, and it's a digital course that takes them basically from step one through all the steps that they would need to start a practice. And then from there, it branched into one-on-one coaching as well. So it's been a really great, situation for me to be in, because I'm able to not only support other clinicians in reaching their goals, but I also think it's such a service to the community, because what I found for so long was so many clinicians who work in these clinic type settings or these agency type settings are just burning out. And so many of them are so great at what they do and they offer so much value to their clients, but they just get to a point where they're so exhausted. And then a lot of them end up leaving the field completely. And I think that that's such a shame, because their talents and their abilities are needed. And so what happens is, they get burnt out, they decide, I'm done with this, I'm leaving. And then the people in the community are the ones who miss out. Potential clients are the ones who miss out from the work that they could have done. So I have found it to be most rewarding in seeing clinicians who have gotten to that point as well, just really burnt out, exhausted, and feeling like, oh, I just can't go at this pace anymore, starting their practices, not only finding success, but doing really, really, really good work for the clients that they serve. And it's just such an amazing thing for me to be able to witness. So that's, service wise, those are the two different services that I offer. And the speaking pieces and the trainings are just different things that I do in the community. I have a blog, that's where the writing component comes in, and I've done pieces for other different venues. And I also have done a number of trainings and speaking engagements, and I really just love being able to interact with different audiences in the community. And it's just been a really cool journey.
Yeah, no, for sure. And my aunt has a very similar story because she's a social worker. And so she started out
Mhm.
sort of in a clinic, working under, someone, and she was just like, I just can't, she got married, she had kids, she's like, I just can't do this anymore. So then, because her husband's also a social worker too, so they sort of both went into private practice, and then they sort of made a schedule where she works 2 days a week, he works the other 2 days a week, and stuff like that. So she's really made it her own. I think that's such a special piece too, going into, private practice or just doing your own thing pretty much in any field, is that you can just sort of make your own schedule and sort of be able to, satisfy all of your life needs in the 24 hours you have each day. And so I think that it's just, I feel like it's just so impactful to have the power to sort of go off and say, I'm going to do this thing, and then like just go and do it. So what is your like you said you learned a lot when you sort of went off into private practice. What is like your top one or two tips you have for people who are stuck in a 9 to 5, or who are just stuck in this sort of scenario where they can't get out of it and they want to take that next step and sort of begin that freedom, but they're too afraid to?
I would say that one of the biggest things that's most important is to know that you can do whatever you set your mind to. So if you're a 9 to 5, or in rather a 9 to 5 setting, and you're really, really passionate about something, or really have this goal or this dream, and you want to do something on your own and kind of branch out from that typical, 9 to 5 setting, knowing that it's possible, but knowing that it's going to be a lot of work. And I think that that's the most important thing I can say. And not in a daunting or just, a way to just, have anybody feel like, oh, it's going to be too much, I don't want to do it, but more so to set the expectation and to be realistic. And I think, leaving my job and starting a practice, I knew was going to be hard. I was under no illusion that this was going to be an easy jump, but I don't think I realized just how much work went into it until I was in it.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I was in a really good position in my life at the time to take on something like that. Whereas I think if my circumstances had been different, I don't know that I would have been able to start as abruptly as I did. I think I would have had to probably ease into it, or kind of transition in a different way. So I think that that's what's most important, is that anyone who is looking to start their own business, regardless if it's mental health or any other field, is to just know that you're going to have to put time and energy in to that, and it's going to take sacrifice. It's going, it's funny because I felt burnt out and exhausted in the agency setting, but I feel like I work more in my running a business than I did ever in an agency.
Yeah.
The difference is that I don't feel that same burnout and exhaustion because it's what I love to do and I'm so passionate about it. And it's, as you had just mentioned, it's on my own terms, it's my own schedule, and I'm a better clinician, I'm a better person, friend, significant other, and all the roles that I hold, I'm better for it because I'm taking care of myself and I'm not burning out. But that's something that I also had to learn how to do, because when I first started my practice, it was very busy and exhausting and draining. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm feeling really stressed. So it was just like I had to figure out that balance. And so that would be my biggest thing, is that anything you want to do, you can absolutely achieve if you put your mind to it 100%. But you have to be realistic about the expectations and know that this isn't going to just be like, oh, I work for myself and I'm my own boss and like everything is, honky dory. Like,
Right.
yeah, you have a lot of benefits to that. And it's amazing if you can achieve that goal, but you're going to have to work for it. And I think a lot of people just don't think of it that way.
Yeah, and I always say, because this is sort of the first year where I've sort of had the opportunity to sort of, make my own hours and like really like work for myself, because so many of my classes are, asynchronous, meaning that I don't have to attend, scheduled Zoom lectures, so I can sort of do the work whenever. And so it's
Mhm.
been super nice, but I always say the tasks you have to do when you start out are going to be so daunting and so difficult, because there's little things you don't want to do, but the overarching goal that you have is a thing you're striving for, which is a thing you need to remind yourself of, because that's the thing you love the most. And just having that in my own mindset has been so transformational, because I just think about the end goal of what I'm doing right now, and it's like, okay, yeah, let me go do those 17 thousand tasks that I have to do right now, because in a year or two they're going to matter so much more on a bigger level. So people always say that, therapists become therapists because, they had something happen to them, or they want to figure out someone else's problem. So what was sort of your sort of reason for getting into this field and sort of wanting to help others and giving back to the community in terms of, in regards to mental health?
So I think that for me, it was two things. The first is that by nature, I think this was just the field for me. I was always the one in the friend group who was deemed like the mom or the therapist of the group, and I was always the one giving advice, and I was the helper, and I was the one who wanted to fix everything. And I kind of just think as a person, that's kind of who I am innately. And then the other component specifically was that I had a loved one who suffered from mental health concerns, and I saw firsthand the impact or lack thereof impact that treatment can or cannot have. So I saw how amazing treatment was for this individual when it was being utilized, but I also saw the impact that person had when the treatment was not being utilized. And I saw the difference in that. And then additionally, I myself had experienced the benefits of therapy growing up at various times throughout my life, in conjunction to this individual in my life who was struggling and suffering themselves. And I witnessed firsthand for myself the benefits of being able to receive counseling and therapeutic support and just the difference it made. And it was one of those things where I always look back and I reflect on how impactful that therapist was for me during those really transitional and difficult times in my life. And I just remember being like, I want to do that for other people. I want to be someone who can offer support. And that's kind of, I think, where the children and families specialization came in specifically, because I really wanted to be a support for kids and for families who were struggling, or kids individually who are struggling, and letting them know at an early age, like, it's okay and you're going to be okay, and there's things that you can do, and just instilling hope and normalizing mental health and normalizing counseling and the need for support, and letting them know that you don't need to deal with everything life throws at you by yourself, and you don't have to be in a position where you feel scared to ask for help, and really just trying to make it okay. And so that's kind of how I started. And ultimately, once I started my journey through the educational process and I started taking classes around it, I mean, I obviously just loved it. And that was where I went with it.
Yeah, I resonate with that so much because part of my major is counseling. And although I'm not going to become a counselor anytime soon,
Mhm.
I chose that part of my major because, I'd always been the therapist in the group. I'd always been the mom in the group, but also it's because I've just seen the transformation within myself of me going to therapy and me doing all these things that I was like, I want to learn more about it. That way I can sort of, help others, whether it's through coaching or whatever I, end up doing. But also B, it's like I want to know sort of how these people do it. You know what I mean? It's like, because you go to therapy and you're like, oh yeah, like, you just like you spill, just like your guts to this person. Then you're like, wait, they have to sort of take that, unpack it, and like, and like hold it. But like, how do they do that all? And so for me, it's just this like, this question of like, what is it like, And so that's sort of why I got into, all this stuff. I want to dive in to the questions that were submitted because they are, let me tell you, they're like deep questions. Like
All
I
right.
was expecting like some like, like surface level stuff, like what is this or like what is that? But these are like, they may be, hopefully you're up for a challenge. So
I
the
guess
first,
I am. Let's do it.
I mean, at least I think they're deep. I'm not sure what your opinion is on them, but the first one is, how do you distinguish being mildly depressed versus sad for a longer period than normal?
So, how do you distinguish having it be like a formal depressive diagnosis as opposed to just a typical feeling of sadness or being down?
Yeah, for
So
a
there's
longer period of
okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of factors when it comes to diagnosing, and what I always tell individuals is that the assessment process is always ongoing. So someone can call to come into a therapeutic setting first. I'm feeling down, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling depressed, and ultimately, it's not going to just be identified immediately in that first session. It can be discussed. It can be, okay, it seems as though, but ultimately, the assessment process will continue to be ongoing because people are consistently, living their lives and things are happening. And so what I always kind of, tell people very generally speaking, and of course the diagnostic process is much more involved than this, and there's a lot of guidelines and different things that you actually have to go through and make sure the checklist of things are there. But generally speaking, we as human beings are going to have times of sadness. We're going to have times when we're down. We're going to have things that bum us out, or where we're going through a rough patch and things are kind of hard. And ultimately, the most important thing is, how are we managing it and how are we handling it? And when people start to find that they're not able to do that and their activities of daily living are being negatively impacted, so ultimately, if I have a bad day or if I have a bad couple of days, like, all right, but then it's like I can bounce back and, like, I kind of go on and I do my thing. But if I'm starting to get to the point where I don't have motivation, I don't want to talk to my friends or family, I'm kind of letting work stuff go, or, I don't really feel like taking care of myself hygiene wise, or I just don't really want to get out of bed, or I'm finding that my moods don't feel as in control anymore as they typically are. Maybe I'm more irritable or on edge. Those are the types of things that I would talk with a client about and kind of tease out, like, well, what's your baseline typically? Family history. What are some other types of symptoms that we're seeing? How long? What other stressors are going on in your life? What are the different factors at play that could be contributing to this? Are there, foreign substances being taken in some form that could be, medication or otherwise, that could be impacting mood? So there's so many factors when it comes to it. And with things like depression or anxiety, it's hard because, like I had just mentioned, we all feel those feelings at some point. And life is very challenging and we are going to have those moments where we're just really down. So the biggest difference really does come into play of just, how is it impacting you? How long have you been experiencing these symptoms, and what's the severity level of those symptoms? And again, I'm giving you a very kind of brief, abridged version of it,
Sure.
because ultimately the process to assess and diagnose is a bit lengthier than that.
Yeah.
What I would say to your listeners is that if you are in a situation where you're kind of like, this feels a little bit more than typical sadness, or this feels a little bit more than just having like a rough day or a rough couple of weeks, it absolutely would be in their best interest to just go chat with someone and just explain what's going on, and have that peace of mind of recognizing, like, okay, this, or what, maybe this is able to be identified as clinically, some kind of depressive diagnosis, and here are the specific tools that can be really helpful for me to tackle that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest thing that, sort of deciphers the two, at least that I've sort of experienced in, my personal life, is like, it depends on how long it lasts, right? So if like, and it's also like, it depends on how, like, if I can actually do something during the day, I know it's not like a depressive episode. But if I actually like cannot get out of bed for the entire day, then I know something more, more severe is up and stuff like that. So I think that your explanation was perfect. I think it also just, it's a case by case basis,
Absolutely.
it's like a give and take. It's like you have to sort of, take this advice and sort of evaluate your own life and look at it and be like,
Yeah.
okay, so like what's exactly going on, and what's specifically happening to me. So I think that.
And
Mhm.
yeah, and I was gonna say, and that's what's the most important thing, and that's why my recommendation would always be to go talk to a professional, one on one, because what people often do is hypothesize for themselves or Google, and it's so broad, and like you said very nicely, it's case by case, and it really is individualized, person to person. For example, you and I hypothetically could both be experiencing some type of depressive diagnosis, but it's going to present differently for each of us because we're different people and our lifestyles and things like that. And, it's so hard to just give a blanket, oh yeah, it's this, or oh yeah, it's that. So that's why, Googling is lovely for so many reasons. But when it comes to stuff like this, I always caution people, like, maybe not Google, and just go chat with somebody and kind of, get a peace of mind in knowing what's going on.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue because the next question actually talks about them Googling their symptoms.
Oh no.
Um, so this person says, I've been sort of sad and they feel lonely and stuff like that. But they're able to sort of get up in the morning and go and do their homework and do, sort of just like go throughout their day. And they said when they Googled it, they saw the term high functioning depression flying around. So can you just go into that, and if it's actually something that is, because I know I've seen it before too, if it's actually something that is sort of like a medical term or what it is exactly, and sort of how
Yeah.
can people decipher, between that and like, depressive disorder and just like being sad or, whatever.
Right. So, absolutely. So, I think you're right. That was a good segue because
Mhm.
high functioning, generally speaking, can kind of be adapted to any kind of diagnosis. Meaning, and all high functioning means is that you might be struggling with a specific diagnosis or specific symptoms and be quote unquote high functioning in the sense that you are doing what you need to do. You are getting up every day. You are taking a shower, brushing your teeth, getting dressed. You are getting to work. You are taking care of your family. You are doing all the things you need to do, but the difference is that internally you're really really struggling while you do that. It takes a lot of effort and energy for you to just get up. It takes a lot of effort and energy, so for you to just get into the shower and so forth. So yeah, you're doing those things, you're functioning, you're seemingly a functioning member of society, but the difference is internally, like it's a lot harder for you than it really should be. And that's where the difference comes in. And again, it's something that Google is not going to tell you. Google is very broad and very vague. And sure, I mean, I'm not against people researching or trying to better understand and learn. I think it's fantastic. There are so many great, blogs and posts and articles and, even just like research article, scientific evidence and
Yeah.
all these things out there that people can read and learn about. But ultimately, it's going to look different for everybody. And like I had mentioned, specifically with anxiety and depressive symptoms, those are the hardest ones because it is that constant, well, what's diagnosable and what's not. And I think the other thing that's so important to highlight is the diagnosis is really just a way for us to understand symptoms. So ultimately, let's just say someone's feeling down or having a rough time and kind of just sad and feeling like, low energy or low motivation and kind of down. Regardless if it's diagnostic or not, you're in therapy, you're tackling the symptoms. The diagnosis just is a way for us to kind of identify what it is the person's struggling with, but it doesn't define who the person is.
Right.
It's simply just an identification tool, for lack of better words. You're treating the symptoms. And so whether the person has something formally diagnosable or not, that wouldn't impact their ability to go to therapy. I treat people who do not meet criteria for a formal diagnosis,
Mhm.
but we're just tackling the stressors or the difficulties that they're dealing with. And that doesn't change because ultimately that's what they need support around. So let's just say it is a situation where somebody is, having a rough time or just feeling a little bit low. And maybe it's because they have a lot going on in their personal lives or, they just have a lot of things happening in life. They still could use support on how to manage those tools. And it doesn't matter, again, if they meet criteria for a diagnosis or not. It's just like, hey, I need a little extra support right now. Cool, let's help you out.
Yes. And that's why I preach therapy to literally every single person I pass by. I always joke with my family. I'm like, I'm like, I'm going to find a therapist who can have you all go to them. And I'm like, I'm going to get a group rate for it because you just guys, you just need to go. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you think you need to or not. I think if you're just struggling with one certain scenario, it's like, it could help so much, whether you go for 2 weeks, 2, 3, whatever, or you go for months and months and months. Like, it doesn't matter, and I just think because I think for me, I've been going therapy for 5 years now, and it's changed everything about my life. And it's helped me so much from where I was to where I am today. And I can't even, like talk bad about it because like even the worst therapists I have who weren't even that bad still helped me in some way, shape or form, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, I'm over here like I'm not, so I just think it's so important, just like, or at least just talk to somebody. It doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
like it should just literally just be anyone. So
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that people just get really stuck on this. And this is to piggyback your point. People get really kind of stuck on this idea of like needing a diagnosis. And it makes sense. I think we as human beings, we just want something to grasp onto to understand it. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, if I'm feeling this way, it's because of this. And it just helps our brain better conceptualize it. So that makes sense. But the issue certainly becomes where if they Google or they talk to somebody or they're just like, okay, well, I don't meet criteria for a diagnosis, like I don't need help then. You might still need the support. You're just now you're feeling like you don't need to quote unquote get it or have to have it or whatever because you don't meet like whatever you're going through, like we're all people. We all need support in some way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, speaking of support, I love how this is like
it's
moving into
flowing
this
so
question. It's
good.
actually so great. I didn't even plan it. So the next question is it healthy to talk about problems or does that attract more issues?
So I think that this is a really great question. And I love it because I'm very big on law of attraction and manifesting and setting intentions, and kind of what we put out, we get back in. So I
Yes.
think that there's a very big distinction. You can talk about your problems. You should talk about your problems, whether it be with a therapist, a trusted friend, a family member, whatever it might be. Talking about your problems isn't going to cause more problems. Talking about your problems isn't going to attract more issues. Talking about your problems is very healthy. That's how you work through them. The difference is, are you getting stuck in those negative spaces, right? So you could be going through something, you could be having a really hard time, and process that with whoever your trusted person that you're processing with is. And then you're doing just that, you're processing and you're working through it. The difference is when people start to kind of, complain, for lack of better words. I can't really think of a better word than that.
Yeah.
Or start to kind of get stuck in that negative space. So it's almost like all they talk about is their issue, or all they're talking about is what they're going through, or all they're talking about is something negative. And that becomes very challenging, because then they start to become, as I'm describing, stuck in that space. So it's all negative all the time. It's constant complaining. It's constant, everything's terrible. This sucks, whatever it might be. And those individuals, when they kind of get in that space, have a hard time getting out of that, as opposed to, yeah, I'm going through some stuff, I'm having a rough day, or this has been on my mind, or this is really hard for me, and I'm working through it, but I'm still able to have moments where I can appreciate things, or feel grateful, or feel good about things. But there's no evidence that supports, talking about your problems is going to cause more problems. I think it's more, how are you talking about them, and how often, and are you talking about them in a way that's lending towards moving through them and past them, or are you talking about them in a way that's keeping you stuck in
Yeah.
them?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think there's a huge difference between talking about your problems just to talk about them and talking about them to gain solutions. Because
Correct.
there's two different pathways when you do it. It's like you consciously choose it no matter what you think you're doing. Like you consciously choose which path you go every single time. So I think
Yeah.
I think and it's also important because I think nowadays it's emphasized as like, oh, like you shouldn't reach out that much, or all this stuff like that. And I feel like people are like, no, like that's not true. Like you should reach out if you're struggling, reach out. Period. End of story. Like that's all.
Absolutely.
And I'm just like, it
Absolutely.
doesn't make sense why people are emphasizing the point of like you shouldn't, sort of talk about not even your problems, but just like talk about what's going on in your life as much, because that's what we do as humans, and we need that connection and we crave that connection. And especially right now, we need that even more.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
All right, the next question I think is quite interesting. When I saw it, I was actually kind of excited to ask you about it. So the question is, I've had friends in the past who I no longer talk to, but I wish I was still friends with them now, and I can't seem to move on from them. Why is this? They asked, why is this happening, and what should I do?
Okay, so I just want to make sure I heard it
Mhm.
correctly.
Yeah,
So the individual is saying that they have had past relationships, friendship wise,
yeah.
are no longer in those friendships, but wish they were, and are having a hard time moving past that.
Mhm.
Okay, so with the very general kind of vague question, so without knowing specifics or details about the specific situation, what I'm hearing is there's likely a lack of closure. So it sounds as though perhaps the relationships had ended maybe without any kind of closure, or perhaps this individual asking the question did not want the relationships to end and they did anyway, and they're feeling like there's maybe things that there's left unsaid, or that they wish that they could have done, kind of that coulda, woulda, shoulda, living in the
Mhm.
past feeling.
Right.
So again, it's hard to say specifically because the background and the details are not there.
Of
But
course.
I would say usually what ends up happening in these situations is that lack of closure feeling, like just it's unfinished business, or it just feels like unsettled in some way. And that's a really icky and uncomfortable feeling, because a lot of times there may not be a way to get closure, and that then makes us feel like we don't really have control, and then that can spark some anxiety and some stress around like, I just want to make this better, I just need to fix it and I can't. So if this person, there's a couple different options, and again, not knowing specifics, just generally speaking, this is a situation where if you are missing a past relationship of some type of friendship and you want to have it again, depending on the circumstances, you could always reach back out to the individuals that you're no longer in contact with. You could try to rekindle those friendships and just kind of reach out to mend fences, or to, reignite any kind of relationship that was there. If that's not an option for any reason, or it's not appropriate, or it's not applicable, given whatever the circumstances might be, it's a situation where a lot of times this is where like journaling comes into play, being able to write down things in a safe, confidential way, writing a letter to those people and never sending it, and kind of just being able to say what you need to say in that capacity, processing it in that way. And this is also something that I think is a situation to learn from, what happened in those circumstances, what was the reasoning, where did things quote unquote go wrong, and then how do I learn from this and apply it to my current friendships or future friendships so that I don't find myself in this position again. But without knowing too much information, I would say it's more of a closure piece. And I think that a lot of that, again, it's either applicable to reach back out, and maybe even just to reach back out to get closure and say like, listen, there was a lot of things I wish I said, or, it's always been nagging at me. I didn't know why X, Y, or Z happened, or I wish this could have been, said at the time, or I wish we could have talked about this. Or like I said, reaching out in the sense of like, hey, can we try again? But that might not always be appropriate, and that might not always be applicable. So if those are the cases, then that's where I would tell, if I was working with somebody, to journal about it, write about it, and kind of process it that way, because that's a way where you get to actually sit on, no distractions, and be alone with your thoughts and really kind of work through whatever it is you're thinking about.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I want to ask you, because I've had a friend sort of go through a situation where this sort of thing happened, but it was kind of romantically. And so with that, like it ended, and then like they have been journaling for months and months and months, and they're still stuck in this point of like they wish they can just like go back to what they had, and they don't want to reach out. And so, like with me, it's like I have no relationship like experience at all. So like they ask me and I'm like, I wish I could help you in some way, but I literally can't. And so like, so do you have any sort of, thoughts on that in any sense?
I think sometimes it's just sitting with the uncomfortable feelings. And, ultimately, if we lose anybody in any capacity, whether it's a true loss in the form of a death, if it's a loss of a relationship romantically, if it's the loss of a friendship or a falling out with a family member, any kind of loss is exactly that. It's a loss. And I think that when it's not the, stereotypical loss in the sense of a death, we don't usually categorize it as such, right? So losing a friendship, or losing a significant other to a breakup or something of that nature, it really is a grieving process that we go through. I mean, even now in 2020, people are grieving the loss of the life they had prior to the COVID, and we're not putting two and two together and recognizing it that way. But a loss is a loss, and so with that comes time, and you have to give yourself time. You have to let yourself feel it. You have to let yourself sit with it. When that happens, it's really icky and uncomfortable, and we don't like it. So what we do is we're like, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to deal with this. And by nature, because we're human beings and we want to protect ourselves, we distract ourselves, or we do something else, or we're kind of like shoving the emotions away. And sitting with the uncomfortable feelings is one of the best things you can do in these types of situations, because you got to feel it. It's a loss. And then recognizing that a loss takes time. You had somebody in your life for however long it was, and now this person's not there. They were part of your routine in some way. They were part of your daily life in some way. Or, when you did X, Y, and Z, they were the one you went to for that. Like, they were impactful. So their loss is also going to be impactful, because now there's a hole there, there's a void. And you kind of just have to let yourself take the time to get through that. And I think because it does feel so uncomfortable and icky, we have this whole like, oh, I want to be over it. I'm done. Like, I want to get over it. I just want to get through it. And we almost put like these unrealistic timelines on things. And that's just not fair or realistic, because it's like, you can't be like, oh, by next Thursday, I'm going to be over this. Like, that's not how it works. and it's like, you kind of just have to give yourself permission to be sad about it and to process it, and trusting that one day it's going to hurt less and less and less. But you kind of have to get yourself to that point and show yourself grace and compassion along the way.
Yes. Oh my gosh. There's so much goodness that's happening. I promise there's one last question from them. I promise, I promise, I promise. And I have like one or two questions for you.
Yeah.
But the last question that I have from them is honestly, it's pretty packed, but I think there's, sort of a short answer to this. How can I not feel lonely during quarantine?
Oh gosh, yes. This is the $1 million
I
question.
know.
Oh my gosh. No, it's such a good question because it's so prevalent. And listen, this has been a friggin' year. Like this has been a year.
Mhm.
And people were already struggling with feelings of isolation and loneliness prior to this. Then you throw in a legitimate pandemic where we absolutely have life-threatening things floating around, like all this stuff, and everyone had quarantine, and everybody, and depending on where you live right now, depending on where you're listening to, it's different for all of us. So every state, every town, we're all under different restrictions. Everybody's kind of operating differently, and it can be incredibly isolating when you cannot go and do the things that you typically did. And so what I'm finding more specifically is that people are missing the life they used to have. They used to go out, they used to go do fun things, they could meet up with friends, they would go out on dates, or they would go out for drinks, or they would go out to a workout class, or they'd go to the gym, or whatever, all these things that gave them a sense of community and a sense of kind of connection. And then all of a sudden that all stopped, and then everybody kind of got used to like just being a little bit of a hermit and staying indoors. A lot of people just like kind of stopped caring. Like, I mean, think about it. Like, you don't have to get dressed up for anything. You can be in sweats all day. Like, we all kind of got used to being in this state of just like, all right, whatever. And then all of a sudden, like, life started to open up back again, but in a different way. And we all had to kind of like relearn what that was like.
Mhm.
And then you throw in like the anxiety factor and everyone's comfort level on things. So, long story short, it is very valid to feel lonely right now and to feel isolated. And it is a very real feeling that so many people are experiencing. And it's okay, and it's there. I think the most important thing is to figure out how to still stay connected in creative ways. So, we are so lucky that this happened during a time where the internet is available and an option. I honestly could not imagine if this happened when like this social media didn't exist, or the internet didn't exist. I mean, that would just be such a different experience for all of us.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was really helpful is having phone calls. I mean, we are in a world of texting or getting together, but like actual phone calls. Have a phone call with somebody. People got really creative and started doing like pen pals, like just like old school pen pal stuff, like, and getting really excited about like checking the mail every day and like, all right, I'm gonna have my pen pal. We're gonna write each other letters or send each other actual cards, and like that's something really fun. Virtual games, like that was something I did a lot during the pandemic. Is I would do game nights with my friends, and we would just kind of do like a Zoom or a FaceTime, and we would play a game. We'd play either a board game, we'd play a card game, we'd just make up games. But it was a way to still feel connected, even though we couldn't formally be together. Obviously, FaceTime, Zooming, like that face-to-face interaction, taking it a step further than the formal phone call, is really great because you feel some form of a connection when you can like physically see the person. Other ideas was like cooking together, baking together, like being on a FaceTime or a Zoom and doing something like, all right, tonight we're going to cook tacos, or tonight we're doing like make your own pizza, and just kind of having that feeling of doing it together. FaceTime movie dates, stuff like that. There's tons of apps. So a lot of people were utilizing dating apps. If you're looking in that realm of loneliness and you're looking for companionship, a lot of people were getting really creative and going on dating apps and meeting people, as opposed to before you could kind of meet someone at a bar, you can meet someone at a restaurant, or maybe a friend or a group setting or whatever, and you can meet someone more organically. But the dating app stuff really kind of ramped up because everyone's feeling this. So you log on and you meet people that way, and then you start chatting and you have that in common of like, yeah, this is kind of weird, like we can't meet, so like how can we get creative and kind of keep talking and get to know each other. There's also apps like Bumble just for friendship, like they have the Bumble friendship app. That was an app that a lot of people started to use, again, just to kind of start building a feeling of community and staying in touch and meeting people in a way that, again, you could relate. Like, hey, like I can't go out and meet new people at my gym or in my yoga class, so let's kind of connect here and start seeing if a friendship could be made. So those are, I would say, really taking advantage of like our internet and the social media component and being able to meet people in these unique ways. And then of course staying connected with the people that are already in your life in fun ways, as opposed to like, oh, I already talked to them, say like I don't have anything else to say. All right, then watch a movie together
Mhm.
or make dinner together. You don't have to talk the whole time, but maybe just that feeling of, not being lonely while you're cooking your pasta, like someone's there to kind of just like check in with, little things like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's honestly been a little bit better for me just because like I go to school in California, but basically all of my friends are in New York. And so it's been easier for me to sort of, like talk to them more often and stuff like that because
Yep.
we're not, always going to class or this and that. And I'm not always going to class and the time difference,
Yep.
not as bad. So it's been a lot easier for me. But I think it'd be a really cool TV show to have if like they experience a pandemic with like without internet. Like that would be very
Oh my
interesting
God.
to see what happens. Like people would go
I could not.
crazy.
I mean, I could not imagine. That's like, and again, the feeling of loneliness is real and valid, but we have
Yes.
so many luxuries and the ability to stay connected. So it's really, I think, about stepping out of the box and getting creative with how you want to do that. Because I get it, like texting and phone calls can become kind of redundant and kind of like, oh, this is boring. So have fun with it. Do something different. Like organize your closets together. I did that. Like I was on the FaceTime with a friend and we organized our closets the same day together. Like we both had to do it. We just chose to do it together. And then it was kind of like we
Yeah.
didn't talk the whole time, but we were on the FaceTime and we would check in, or I was doing the game nights. I was doing like cooking dinners together. Like, and then you sit and you eat together, quote unquote. Just
Yeah. Yeah, for
silly
sure.
little things to try.
No, that's so good. Yeah. And sometimes like people like don't think about those either, because they're like, oh, it's so annoying. We can't do this and that. And they focus on like what they can't do, but like they forget what they actually can do and
Yeah.
what they can do. So
Yeah.
it was
Me and
so
my one friend, we would do dance parties. We'd literally throw on music and we'd FaceTime and we'd have dance parties together. Like just anything to kind of be silly and let go and have fun together.
yeah, 1,000%, 1,000%. Thank you so much for answering those questions.
Yeah, of course. They were
Was-
great questions.
oh, yeah, they were actually, I was very impressed, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it could be you ask a question and there could be so many random things that are sent to you, but I'm glad that they were good. I want to roll into the final question, which is something that I ask every single guest who has ever been on, and that is based off of the title of this podcast, which is Fashion Your Passion. What is one tip that you would give dreamers based off of how you have fashioned your passion?
This is a good question. So how have I fashioned my passion,
Yes.
and how would I encourage others to do the same? This is a good question. Of all the questions that we were asked today, this is the one that's going to stump me and give me a minute to think about. Let's see. I would say, and you said this is for like the dreamers and the doers, right?
Yeah, it's for the people who want to start something and want to go after their passion, but they're just not sure how to, or they're scared, or they just don't know.
Faith over fear. That's my answer. That was a mantra that I still say to myself. And faith does not have to be strictly religious. I just mean faith in general. It can be anything that you want it to be. It doesn't have to be anything tied to anything specific. Just having faith in yourself and having faith in your ability to accomplish and achieve whatever it is you want to. Because at the end of the day, you know what you want to do. You know what you're capable of, and you know if you're going to do the work to get there. And you are going to be hit with roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. If I had listened to every person that told me, what are you thinking? You're crazy. I can't believe you're doing this. You're never going to fill up. You're never going to get clients. Are you out of your mind? What are you doing? Just quitting your job? What, like, if I literally stopped and listened to all of those, I wouldn't be here. You and I wouldn't even be having this conversation. I would have just cried and probably begged for my job back. And that would have been that. And I still would have been miserable working where I was working. And my life would be so different than it is right now. And I think that that's the most important thing. You have to have faith. And again, just faith in yourself, faith in your ability. And you have to let that trump the fear, because the fear will be there. 100% it's going to be there. It's not going anywhere either. The fear is always going to be there. And if the fear is not there, then your dream isn't big enough. So you have to,
Yes.
like you have to kind of take it that way too. Like you're going to have a fear because your dream is so big.
Mhm.
So let that fuel you. Have that faith. Let the fear fuel you. Have faith in yourself and just never stop. Never listen to other people. You know yourself. Listen to your gut. Stick with your instincts. And, that's that.
Yes, that is such a great way to end. I am 1,000% positive people are going to want more of your energy. So where can they find you on social and just on the web in general?
Yeah, so they can find me on social media. I'm actually I'm so hit or miss with my social media. So and I'm saying this purposely, I love my social media and I love engaging with my followers and I love being connected to the community, but I also am a big proponent in taking social media detoxes. So I'm just one of those people that does that often. So I will have stretches of times where I'm like super invested, super involved, and I'm like on it. And then I have times where I take a break. And I think it's really healthy. I encourage my own clients to do it for self-care and for mental health and wellness, because social media can be amazing, but it can also be very draining and taxing, and we need to protect our energy. So they can find me on social at Marandi-Steeves _LCSW, which I'm sure you'll tag in the notes and stuff too for people to click. They can find my blog, smsteevesblog.com, on Pinterest. I'm on, I have a website, smsteeves.com, and I will, make sure that you have all the links to that, so that if people want to stay connected, that they can click on that in your notes section.
Yes, for sure. So everyone go check her out. And like she said, all the links will be in the show notes below. As well, do not forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. That's what helps me rise up in the ranks and just have more people see the show. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on again. And those of you listening, I will talk to you guys next week.